get started here.
All right. Okay.
Sit down here. Well, let's start off at the very beginning and tell us where you grew up
Okay.
and how you got into your first undergraduate program.
Okay. I was born on January the 6th, 1928. That makes me 87 years old. In my farmhouse that I lived in, that was several miles away from a town. My dad took a horse and a covered buggy and drove into town and got the doctor and brought the doctor out to the house. My mother did not know she had twins, and so when my little sister was born, all of a sudden they saw me coming, and so the doctor handed the baby to my grandma Grote, and they tried everything to get her to breathe, and she did not breathe. I was the runt of the two, and I grew up on a farm. We went to school, to an unusual school, but ordinary in central Illinois. It was an 11th grade school. A lot of high schools were small, and you typically didn't graduate from them. You transferred to a larger school, and I transferred to Pana High School, which you can look on the map is about 7 miles from Oconee, and I graduated from Pana. I was a good student, and I was a pre-college student, and so they had prepared me for that. And I went to Eastern Illinois State Teachers College, which is now, of course, Eastern Illinois University. I went there because my two sisters and my brother had all gone there, and it was just kind of ordinary that I thought of Eastern. I visited it when I visited my brother and two sisters, and I fell in love with it, so I went to Eastern. I studied there to be a teacher. That was my goal, to be a high school teacher, and I was being drafted by the Army because the war was on or just nearing completion, and so to avoid being drafted for an unknown time period, I had a chance to enroll in the Army for a fixed term for 18 months, and I entered the Army. I served during World War II, and returned and used my GI Bill, which I very much needed to finish my undergraduate work. By the way, I married while I was in school, and my bride is still my bride 67 years later, and she's a graduate of Eastern, as I am a graduate. I have been recognized by Eastern twice, which I greatly appreciate, once as a distinguished alumnus and once as the distinguished technologist in the first 100 years of the university, which was a great honor. I was interested, the question about what my career was going to be like, I always had in mind, if I could do so, to be a high school teacher. My mother was a teacher. My brother and both sisters were teachers. It was only logical for the baby of the family to follow in their footsteps.
And what made you decide to go on to graduate school?
Well, when you're teaching, you realize that if you get a graduate degree, you can improve in your position, you can advance in your position, you can get administrative positions if you want one. And so I immediately, while I was teaching, I went to University of Missouri and I earned my master's degree there in education, and graduated in 1955, and went back to teaching following that. I stayed where I was teaching. I taught in 2 small towns in southern Illinois. Great first year, good experience, a lot of community experience. And I decided then, and you have to understand me, I always planned for my next position. I always prepared for my next position. And so the advancement in high school is to teach in one of the big high schools in suburbia. So I went to Chicago and taught at Skokie, which is a very large community, important community in Illinois, and a very wealthy community. And I served there as one of the department, but I also served as the administrator of the adult and continuing education program that was run at night. I had a very large enrollment because of the kind of community that I had. But while there, I would have liked to have been the department head. We had several men in the department, and I observed the department head. He was a very nice man and very nice to work for, but that triggered me to say, well, I'd like to be a department chairman somewhere. So I was moving from along on my career. I left that position, and this is important. I took a job here in Kentucky with the State Department of Education. I worked for Dr. Bob, I'm at loss for his name, sorry. And he was the superintendent for several years. And in that position, I visited all of the high schools. I had a statewide job. I visited every high school in Kentucky and a few junior high schools. I met superintendents. I got to know people. I got to know principals, counselors throughout the whole state, which proved to be very valuable when I came here later. You ask about my first visit to Morehead State.
Yeah, how did that go?
Well, I thought about that, and I was going to tell you in 1960, and then I thought about it. I visited Morehead when I was a supervisor in the State Department of Education. That was part of my job. And it was in 1972, now put that in your mind, 1972. And I drove into the town and looked the town over, and I went to Morehead State. It was a quiet little university. No one had much heard of it. It was strange. It was so quiet. There was very little excitement, even in the students. I just walked away and said, this is a sleepy little college located in eastern Kentucky. It had then, and that has continued, been a bias to people. Anything east of I-75 has some stigma, and it had a whole lot of stigma when I visited in 1972. The next time I came to Morehead, I came for my interview, and that was in the spring of 1960. I came. I just finished. I was doing my doctorate. I was in the middle of my doctor's degree at the University of Illinois, and I drove in town. In fact, when there was a huge snowstorm, and I couldn't get here the night I wanted to. I wanted to get here on Saturday, but I stayed in Lexington, called the office, and they said, come ahead and get here when you can. So I came following a snowstorm, and I spent some time, of course, with Dean Lappin, and I spent some time with the president. When I went home that day or the next day, I talked to my wife about my visit, of course, and I said to her, I really would like to work with the president. He's very dynamic. I can see a lot of development and happening. But I said, oh my, Dean Lappin. I say, he just looks to me like a grumpy old man, and I may have some trouble working with him. So you asked the question about how long did I work with, or how was my work with Dr. Doran? I'm wearing a tie today because I'm going to talk a lot about Dr. Doran. That was his signature. The students used to say that he had a tie on his pajamas because you never saw him without his bow tie. I was with him 11 years here, and to social affairs, relaxed affairs, and then I was a friend of his. We developed a strong friendship, and I only saw him once without a bow tie. So today, when I talk about Dr. Doran, I'm wearing the bow tie to identify him and to show you what his signature was. You ask, well, ask me your next question and
okay. So what year was it that you actually took the position here on campus?
What?
When you took your position here on campus, was that in the 70s?
1960. I arrived in 1960 on June the 10th, and I remember that because that was my first day to report. And I was here for 11 years, so it was not a temporary thing. They brought me here as one of the first chairs of a new division of applied science, which we'll address later. And I had just, as I said, probably I just finished my doctorate with the University of Illinois by then. You ask about how well is Morehead State College, how well known was Morehead State College? And I'd have to say that it was not well known, even in the state of Kentucky. The new music department, because Dr. Jane Duncan, who I know you're going to interview later, had arrived a few years earlier, and the music department was actually gaining some recognition. But when we recruited faculty out of state, we had to take a map with us to show them where Morehead State was, and we had to have a really great sell about the university or they were not interested. We went out at one time looking for 40 people. I'll speak to that later. At one time, we were growing so fast that we were looking at 40 people, not only that year, but in following years. We did have a great advantage, and they're gone now. We had a whole lot of small apartment houses on the campus. And we were given so many to go out and recruit for. Like a dean, I would have maybe 3 houses, okay, that year. And I would keep them in my pocket. And when I saw I needed to add a little bit to get them to come, I could say we could provide you with housing at a very low cost. And that was a great advantage. One of the questions, did you work for Dr. Doran, or how did he work? I worked for Dr. Doran for 11 years. He was a dynamic leader. He really was. He was a change agent, and boy, did we need that at the time. He had been the Speaker of the House and the legislature, and he knew a lot of important people, and he knew a lot of legislators. He knew how the system worked, and I like to say he worked the system. Buildings were built, often more than one being built at one time, and our enrollment was growing at an exceptional rate. And he could get funds where very few other presidents were treated as well, and we took advantage of that. There was an excitement on campus, and I have to say, it was fun. As the years came and went, his style of management became out of date, and he began to lose a little prestige that he had held here earlier. He probably should have retired 4 or 5 years before he did. Yes, in many ways he was an imperial leader, but you have to recognize what he accomplished. And he, if you looked at the number of buildings, and I have written a story about that, it's impressive as to how many buildings and how much growth we had. You know, when I first came here, there were about 1,800 students here, and of course now we know it's over 10,000. To show some of his imperialism, he would say to the students at the opening day prior to school, he would say, "Now this is my college, and I establish the rules. And if you don't like the way we run this place, you get yourself a college, and you can establish your own rules." He said that. I've heard him say it many times. He'd say to faculty, if you don't like it here, there's a bus going east and a bus going west. That didn't work as the years passed. It worked at the time we needed it. And you need to all understand that I think he accomplished a miracle. Mrs. Doran had a great deal to his credit. She was a person that was dressed very nicely, and she wore hats. She probably had 100 hats, and she established us as a school that was good, that was fancy in some ways, you know, that we knew what we were doing, and all of that contributed a lot to the breaking of the bias from the I-75 coming into Eastern Kentucky. She contributed a lot. She taught a course here, and that was very effective. I thought I would show you a picture that you might like, a couple of pictures. This is a picture of Mrs. Doran and Mrs. Grote. Mrs. Grote was the host that day. So the two of them are there, and Wilma, I was president, and we regularly invited them over, and they loved that. And this is just simply a picture of two first ladies who learned to really appreciate each other. And then this picture is my favorite picture of my work with Dr. Doran. This picture shows the two of us. It was the same day that was taken when I hosted Dr. Doran, and it looks like we might be arguing, but we weren't. We were very good friends, and this was just a conversation that we were having that day, and we were both gesturing and trying to make our points. And I just love this. I love this picture because it's so representative of my working with Dr. Doran. Okay. You ask about my work with Dean Lappin.
Yes.
I've already said that my first impression was not good. But I reported to Dean Lappin for 11 years. He was my boss, my supervisor. So, of course, I got to know him very well. When I came for the interview, I reported to my wife that I might have trouble. But as it turned out, I developed a deep respect for him. And I used him as a model over my career. He was a truly professional person. And we became really personal friends. He often called me to his office at 3:30 or 4 o'clock and asked me just to come up, and we just sat and talked about our jobs, or talked about the university, but talked personally too. So I really became a close friend, a complete opposite of what I thought would happen. The story I can tell about him relates to the professional standards that he expected. He was a perfectionist, and he asked the deans, the 5 deans, to be perfectionists too when we related to him. You have to know that, okay? So when we became a university on July 1st of 1966, he called us in and said, we just gotten the new bulletin, which we called the bulletin. It was the college catalog. We'd just gotten the new one because we didn't know when we were writing it that we were going to become a university. That Dr. Doran probably didn't know it then either. That was a political change that was put together rather quickly. So on July 1, he came back and said, "Well, we're now a university." And Dr. Doran, or Dr. Lappin, called us together, and he said, "We're going to have to change that bulletin, and we're going to have to change it fast. So I want all of you," and this is important. He said, we had 5 deans sitting around the table. He said, "I want you deans to edit your section of the catalog and make doggone sure that you don't leave college in there. Put university wherever it should go and take the college out." So we did that. When we got the first bulletin back, on top of every page that Dr. Lappin edited was State College, not university. He was embarrassed. Oh, you can't imagine how embarrassed he was. There was a reason that happened. It mostly happened at the printers. But anyway, we turned around and had to write a 3rd edition, and it was accurate. I left Morehead in June of 1971. My notes say 1980. No, it says 1871. I'm 87, but that doesn't go back there. But anyway, I became president of Schoolcraft College. People misread that name. It was a fine community college named after a distinguished man of Henry Rowe Schoolcraft. He was the first chairman of the Board of Regents for the University of Michigan. His name is on a county. His name is on a very famous road into Detroit. And so in the competition of naming our college, they decided to name it the Schoolcraft College. I determined that if I was going to come back to Morehead, and it was my dream from the time I came here and watching Dr. Doran and watching the university, I dreamed of becoming president of Morehead State. And I tried to prepare myself for that. And one of the things that I thought I needed to do was to get some experience, learn how to be president. You have to learn how to be president, by the way. And it's not an easy road to learn. So I decided that I need to do something to prepare, and I thought becoming president of a college would be a good idea. And I was president of Schoolcraft College for 10 years. It was the 2nd decade in the history of the school. The school started in 1960. Yeah, that's right. And 10 years later, 11 years, I guess, I went there as the president. Excuse me, I need to look at my notes. After being there for 10 years and having that experience of a single college, I thought I needed some additional experience. So I took a job in Spokane, Washington. Spokane is a large city, 350,000. I'd never lived in a place like that. It was a very dynamic place. And I was the president, but they called it chancellor, of 3 colleges. Well,